I wasn't supposed to be there. I don't mean that in the wrong place, wrong time way. I mean it literally. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near that building. I was a 26-year-old barista with $92 in my checking account, wearing the same hoodie I'd spilled almond milk on 2 days ago, standing in the lobby of one of the most expensive residential towers in Chicago. My best friend, Jordan, was the one who dragged me there. His sister worked as a personal assistant for someone rich, like private chef, valet driver, owns 3 penthouses rich. The guy was apparently flying to Singapore and needed someone to water his plants while he was gone. Jordan volunteered me. I was broke. I said yes. He won't even be there, Jordan said, stuffing the building access card into my hand. You just go in once a day, water his plants, and make sure nothing leaks or catches fire. Easy money. But when I stepped into the mirrored lobby and saw the doorman eyeing me like I'd stolen something, I realized I didn't belong there at all. Still, I flashed the card, nodded like I knew what I was doing, and walked to the elevator. The doors opened with a quiet hiss. The inside was glass, walls, ceiling, floor. The kind of elevator that made you aware of every floor you weren't supposed to be on. I tapped the card, hit 47, and felt the thing glide up like it was floating. That was when I saw him. Through the transparent wall, in the neighboring elevator, going down as I went up. He was tall. Sharp suit. Dark hair, slicked back. The kind of face that made you think he knows it. Whatever it is, he looked right at me. Not past me, not through me. At me. Our eyes met for maybe 2 seconds before the elevator dropped him out of sight. But something about it made my stomach flip, like he'd seen something in me. Or maybe recognized something, I don't know. The 47th floor opened into a private foyer bigger than my entire apartment. Hardwood floors, gallery lighting, windows stretching so high they looked like they were swallowing the skyline. The place was stunning. Cold. Perfect. I walked in slowly, unsure if I should even breathe too loud. There were the plants, lined up near the window like soldiers. I grabbed the watering can Jordan said would be under the sink, and went about pretending like I knew what I was doing. That should have been the end of it. Water the plants, enjoy the view, maybe sneak a fancy chocolate from the fridge. Easy. But when I turned around, he was there. The man from the elevator. Same sharp suit, same intense stare. Except now he was standing in the doorway like he hadn't just been leaving the building 15 minutes ago. "Oh shit, sorry," I blurted. "I thought you were in Singapore." He cocked his head. "And you are?" "Ah, I'm Tyler, Jordan's friend. I held up the watering can like it was a badge. "I was just helping with your plants." Jordan said. He didn't move, just looked at me. "Tyler," he repeated. His voice was low, calm, expensive. Then he stepped further into the room. "You weren't supposed to be here until tomorrow." Yeah, I know. I just figured I'd start early, since Jordan said you'd be gone by now, and he held up a hand, not rudely, just firmly. "It's fine." I stood there like an idiot, holding the can like it might protect me from how rich and composed he looked. "You don't usually do this kind of thing," he said. "What?" "House sitting." "No," I admitted. "I make lattes. I'm just broke." That made him smile, like a real smile, and it hit me like a punch to the ribs. "I'm Ethan," he said, "and I'm not in Singapore because the meeting got canceled." "Oh," he stepped past me, walking toward the kitchen. "You hungry?" I blinked. "What?" "There's a chef-prepared meal in the fridge that I'm not going to eat. You can have it, unless you're allergic to truffle oil." I wasn't. I didn't even know what truffle oil tasted like. But I followed him into the kitchen anyway. That was how it started. A glass elevator, a wrong date, and a frozen meal with ingredients I couldn't pronounce. He didn't ask me to leave. Instead, he poured wine, told me to sit, made small talk like we weren't living in completely different tax brackets. And I sat there, trying not to spill anything on the marble counter. He was easy to talk to in a way that made me nervous. Because guys like Ethan don't talk to guys like me. Not in their penthouses. Not with that soft, curious tone. Not with that look in their eyes like they're interested. I left after an hour. He didn't ask for my number. Didn't offer to pay me. Just said, "See you tomorrow?" And I said, yeah. Like I'd already decided I would be back. Even if I had to invent a new plant watering schedule just to make it happen. I didn't tell Jordan what happened that first night. Mostly because I didn't know what happened. I hadn't flirted exactly. Neither had he. And yet something was there. In the way Ethan watched me. The way he spoke. Measured, warm, amused. Like I was more than just some broke stranger holding a watering can. The next afternoon, I returned to the penthouse. Same access card. Same glass elevator. But this time, my palms were sweating. He was already there, standing by the windows, staring out over the skyline with a drink in hand. "You're early," he said without turning. "You're home," I said, stepping inside. "I rescheduled my trip," he replied. It didn't feel urgent anymore. I wasn't sure what to say to that. It sounded like a casual comment, but I felt it in my chest. We fell into an easy rhythm over the next few days. I'd show up under the pretense of checking on his apartment, and he'd always be there, either already home or arriving minutes after me, like he'd been waiting. We'd talk, eat, sometimes watch something on the absurdly large screen in his media room. One night, we ended up arguing about whether Titanic was actually a good movie or just emotionally manipulative. I cried during it. I admitted. He smirked. Exactly. That same night, he offered me a second glass of wine and asked what I'd do if I had money. Not just a little extra, but unlimited. "Like you?" I teased. He didn't answer, just watched me. I paused. I don't know. Buy a car that doesn't rattle on the highway. Maybe finally take my mom on that trip to Ireland she's always dreamed of. His eyes softened. "You're close with her?" "She raised me on her own," I said. "Worked 2 jobs most of my life. I owe her everything." Ethan was quiet for a second. Then he said, "My parents live in Connecticut. I haven't spoken to them in 2 years." That caught me off guard. Why? He drained the rest of his wine and looked down at the glass. Let's just say they had a very clear picture of the kind of son they wanted. And I didn't fit it. I didn't push. But I didn't look away, either. And in that quiet moment, I felt something shift again. This wasn't just about drinks and fancy food anymore. The next time I came over, I found a small bundle wrapped in twine on the kitchen counter. A sweatshirt. Soft. Brand new. My size. "You left yours here," Ethan said casually. It had a hole in the sleeve. I stared at it. "I didn't mean to leave it," he shrugged. "Still figured you could use something warmer." I looked at him. "You didn't have to do that." He leaned against the counter. "I know." And there was that silence again. Not awkward, just charged. "Ethan," I said carefully, "why are you really keeping me around?" He met my eyes. "For company," he said. "For honesty. For someone who doesn't pretend to be impressed by my watch collection." I laughed. "That's because I didn't know you had one." He stepped closer, something new in his expression. Curious, tentative. "You're the first person in a long time who talks to me like I'm not a headline." "A headline?" "Tech investor worth 300 million before 35. That kind." "Oh," I said. "That's very specific." He smiled. "Because it's true," I blinked. "Wait, you're Ethan Cade?" "The Ethan Cade?" He nodded. I'd heard the name. Everyone had. He was the guy who'd sold a startup to Apple at 29. The kind of person who could walk into a room and have half the country's economy whispering. "And you didn't tell me?" I asked. "I wanted to see if you'd treat me differently if you knew." I opened my mouth, closed it again. "I honestly don't know how to treat billionaires, so..." He laughed. God, that laugh. Low and real. That night, I stayed longer than usual. We didn't touch. But when I left, He walked me to the elevator. Just before the doors closed, he reached out, just a brush of his fingers over my wrist. "Tyler," he said, voice quiet. "Yeah? If I asked you to stay for dinner sometime, like, not just takeout and sarcasm, but a real dinner at the table, would that be weird?" I blinked. "Not weird," I said, "just unexpected." "Is that a yes?" I nodded. He smiled. "Tomorrow?" "Okay." And the elevator closed. I didn't know what to wear. It sounds stupid, but the idea of having a real dinner with Ethan made my brain short-circuit. This wasn't just swinging by to water his plants or microwave truffle risotto on his Italian marble countertops. This was dinner. Like plates, silverware. Sitting across from him while he looked at me like I was someone worth inviting into that world. I settled on a black button-down I hadn't worn since a wedding 2 years ago. It was a little tight across the shoulders now, but it didn't scream barista. And that felt like a win. When I stepped into the penthouse, I smelled garlic. Not the prepackaged, delivered to your door kind. Real garlic, butter, something savory and slow cooked. "You cook?" I asked as I stepped inside, surprised. Ethan was standing barefoot at the stove, sleeves rolled up, a towel over his shoulder. He looked casual, unfiltered, like a version of himself he didn't let other people see. "Not well," he said, "but I wanted to try." "You cooked for me?" He turned, smiled. "Don't act so shocked," I laughed. "I'm not used to billionaires sweating over a saucepan." He lifted the lid of a pot and shrugged. "Well, this billionaire knows how to follow a YouTube tutorial." The table was set. Like, actually set. 2 wine glasses, cloth napkins, low music playing in the background, and the lights were dimmed just enough to make the skyline glow behind the windows like a painting. We sat down, ate, talked, and something about it felt dangerously normal. He asked me about the worst date I'd ever had. I told him about the guy who brought his mom to the second date just to see what she thought. He nearly choked on his wine. I asked him the same question, and he said, a hedge fund manager who tried to pitch me crypto over oysters. I left before dessert. We laughed. We refilled our glasses. And at some point, I realized we'd finished eating an hour ago but hadn't moved from the table. I looked at him across the candlelight. He wasn't perfect. His hair was slightly tousled. His collar was half unbuttoned. There was a smudge of sauce near his plate. And I liked him more for all of it. "So," he said, swirling his wine, "do I get points for effort?" "Definitely," I said. "This is the nicest dinner I've had in ever." "Really?" "I eat cereal out of coffee mugs half the time, so yeah, really." He smiled, but there was something softer under it. Less performative. More him. "I don't do this a lot," he said after a moment. "Cook? Invite people into this space. My life." I nodded. "Why me?" He looked at me, and there was a pause. Then he said, "Because you don't want anything from me. That you know of." I teased. He smirked. "True." I reached for my water and accidentally knocked the fork off the table. It clattered loudly against the floor, snapping the moment in half. I bent to grab it, but Ethan was already up, crouching beside me. Our hands bumped against the handle, and we both froze. Too close. His fingers wrapped around mine before I could move. When I looked up, his face was right there, inches from mine. "You're not what I expected," he said softly. "I get that a lot," I murmured. His thumb brushed the back of my hand, and then, carefully, like he was giving me a chance to say no, he leaned in. His lips touched mine, soft, slow, testing. It wasn't a kiss that begged. It didn't demand. It asked, and I answered. I leaned into it, hands sliding up to his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his skin under the rolled sleeve. His breath hitched slightly, just enough to make my chest tighten. When we finally pulled apart, We didn't speak right away. I just stared at him, slightly breathless, my heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. He was looking at me like I was real, like I mattered. I exhaled. "Well," I said, voice uneven, "you kiss better than you cook." He laughed, and something in me relaxed. We moved to the couch after that. Not to sleep together, just to be. He sat close. Our thighs touched. I didn't pull away. The city buzzed outside the windows, but the room was quiet, safe. I asked him what it felt like to have that much money, if he ever felt lonely in it. He paused, then said, "I think I've gotten so used to being a brand that I forgot how to just be Ethan." "You can be him with me," I said before I even thought it through. He looked at me and nodded. After that kiss, everything changed. But not all at once. There wasn't some grand confession or sudden shift into coupledom. No dramatic bedroom scene. We still played it cool. Ethan was still Ethan. Composed, unreadable sometimes, but warmer around the edges now. And I was still the guy who didn't belong in that building, that world, that orbit, but he kept inviting me back. Sometimes for dinner. Sometimes just to talk. One night we sat on the floor of his living room eating pizza out of the box, watching a documentary about volcanoes. "This is weirdly hot," I said, gesturing to the lava. He gave me a look. "You're weirdly hot." It was the first time he'd said anything like that out loud. I didn't know how to respond, so I leaned into him until our shoulders touched and let the silence speak for us. But even with all of that, there was still a distance. Not physical, emotional. Sometimes I'd catch him zoning out, staring at something invisible, lost in thought. And when I asked, "You okay?" he'd always smile too fast and say, "Yeah, just tired." It didn't feel like the truth. One Friday night, I showed up with a six-pack and no plan. I knocked, waited. No answer. I called. No pickup. I texted, "Hey, everything okay?" Nothing. I stood in the hallway outside his door for 10 minutes, debating whether to try the access code he'd given me 2 days ago, then decided against it. Something about that felt wrong. Intrusive. So I left. He didn't text back until noon the next day. "Sorry. Needed space. I'll call you later." I stared at the message. It was short. Cold, even. That afternoon, I went to work a shift at the cafe. Made lattes. Pretended like my heart wasn't in my throat. Later that night, I got another text. "Can I see you tomorrow?" I wanted to be mad. I wanted to say no. But I didn't, because the truth was, I missed him. And no matter how much I tried to keep this thing casual, I was already too far in. He looked tired when he opened the door, like he hadn't slept. He didn't say much. Just stepped aside and let me in, then followed me to the couch like a man walking underwater. We sat in silence. Eventually, I said, "What happened?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "I get like this sometimes," he said. "Shut down. Go quiet." I nodded slowly. "Okay, why?" He looked at me, and I could see it. Whatever he'd been holding back. Not just sadness. Something heavier. Older. "My dad used to disappear when I was a kid," he said finally. Not literally. He was always there. But emotionally? Gone. Cold. Unreachable. I listened. "I swore I wouldn't be like that," he said. "But when I feel something too much, when I start to care, really care, I get scared I'll break it, so I pull back." My chest tightened. I looked at him. "I'm not asking you to be perfect, Ethan," I said. "I'm just asking you to let me in." He nodded slowly. "I know," he said, "and I want to. He trailed off. Then he reached for my hand and held it like he was afraid I'd vanish. That night, we didn't kiss. We didn't even sit that close. But I stayed. He fell asleep on the couch, head tilted back, mouth slightly open. And I watched him, not in a weird way, but in the way you look at someone and realize they're not untouchable. They're human, flawed, beautiful because of it. I covered him with a blanket, turned off the lights, and sat in the armchair nearby until morning. I woke up the next morning to the soft creak of the couch. Ethan was sitting up, squinting into the early light leaking through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His hair was messy, shirt wrinkled, face tired, but something in his eyes had shifted, less guarded, less alone. "You didn't leave," he said. "Nope," I replied, stretching in the armchair. "Slept right here." "Well, not slept exactly, but—" His eyes met mine. "Thank you." I shrugged. "I didn't do anything." "You stayed," he said. "That's not nothing." There was a pause. Then he asked, "Do you want coffee?" "Do you have coffee?" He stood. French press, Ethiopian roast. Pre-ground by a guy named Oliver who calls himself a bean sommelier. I raised an eyebrow. "Of course it is." In the kitchen, he moved like someone used to working alone. Efficient, quiet, but I noticed the way his shoulders relaxed when I leaned beside him at the counter. We didn't talk much, just existed near each other. It was the kind of silence that didn't demand filling. After coffee, I wandered back into the living room, looking out at the skyline. The world looked a little softer that morning, less sharp around the edges. Ethan joined me a few minutes later, standing just behind me. "Tyler," he said. I turned. "I want to try," he said. "With you." My throat went dry. "Try what?" He stepped closer. "Something real." There it was. No games, no posturing, just a simple truth. And I felt it land somewhere deep in my chest. "I want that too," I said quietly. He exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath. We didn't kiss. Not then. We just stood there, side by side, staring out over the city like something had finally settled between us. Over the next few weeks, we tried. We didn't tell anyone. Not because we were ashamed, but because it felt like ours. I still worked my shifts. He still took meetings in his home office. But more and more, we blurred the lines between visiting and staying. One night, I found a spare toothbrush in the bathroom drawer. Another night, he handed me a spare key card without a word. We didn't define it. We didn't need to. But not everything stayed simple. One morning, I showed up and the doorman stopped me. "Mr. Cade's requested privacy today." I blinked. "What?" He handed me a small envelope with my name on it. Inside, a note written in Ethan's clean, precise handwriting. "I need a day. Not away from you. Just with myself. Please don't take it personally." I didn't know what to do with that. He hadn't ghosted me. He hadn't pushed me out. But it still felt like a door had closed. I spent the rest of the day walking the city, thinking, wondering what it meant to love someone who sometimes needed to disappear, even when they didn't want to leave you. That night, I texted him. "You don't have to explain, just tell me when you're ready." He replied 5 minutes later. "Tomorrow. Dinner. Just us." I stared at the message. Something about it felt like a beginning. Or maybe a turning point. When I showed up the next evening, he was already at the table. Candles, wine, 2 plates of something fancy I couldn't pronounce. He looked up when I entered. Smiled. "Thanks for understanding," he said. "I'm still figuring out how to," I admitted. He stood, walked over, and took both my hands. "Let me help." And this time, when he kissed me, slow, steady, certain, I let myself believe it was okay to want this. To want him. It didn't fall apart overnight, but things started slipping in ways I couldn't ignore. It was subtle at first. Missed texts, delayed replies. A last-minute cancellation when we were supposed to see a movie. Then one night he showed up at the cafe where I worked, wearing sunglasses indoors and looking like he hadn't slept. He ordered a black coffee. Didn't even glance at the pastries he usually teased me about. I leaned over the counter. "You okay?" He nodded too fast. Fine. You sure? I said I'm fine. I froze. It wasn't the words. It was the way he said them. Tight, sharp, like he was barely holding something in. He left without finishing the coffee. I stood there behind the counter, confused and pissed off and trying not to take it personally. A few nights later, I used my keycard. I probably shouldn't have, but he hadn't answered any of my messages for 2 days. And something in me, the part that had started falling for him, couldn't sit with that silence anymore. The place was dark, quiet. I stepped in cautiously, calling his name. No answer. Then I saw him, sitting on the floor in the media room, back against the couch, a bottle of whiskey next to him. His shirt was half unbuttoned. His eyes were glassy. Ethan, I said, heart pounding. What the hell? He looked up slowly. Hey, that's it? Hey? I told you I get like this, he mumbled. You said you needed space sometimes. You didn't say you spiraled. He winced. It's not always this bad. I sat down across from him, not touching, just there. Talk to me, I said. He stared at the floor. Then, slowly, I had a panic attack during a meeting 2 days ago. First one in years. I blinked. Jesus. I've been trying to prove something lately. To investors. To myself. I don't even know anymore. He looked at me then, and his voice broke just slightly. I'm so scared of being seen as weak. You're not, I said. But I feel like I am. And when I start feeling like that, I shut down. Because it's safer than falling apart in front of someone who... He trailed off. Who what? I asked. Who matters, he whispered. My chest tightened. I moved closer, sat beside him. Let our shoulders touch. You don't have to be strong all the time, I said. Not with me. He didn't reply, but he leaned into me, slowly, gently. And we just sat there in the dark, the city glowing outside the windows, the silence heavy, but shared. The next morning I found him in the kitchen. He looked better, tired, but grounded. I'm sorry, he said before I could speak. Don't be. He set a mug of coffee on the counter and pushed it toward me. I'm trying, he said. I really am. I know. He looked at me then. I'm not used to being this close to someone, he said. I don't know how to do it right. Then let's figure it out together, I said. He nodded, and for the first time in days, he smiled like he meant it. A month later, Ethan asked me to come with him to a gala. It was one of those high society events with overpriced wine and fake smiles, held in a glass ballroom at the top of a hotel I could never afford to step into, let alone dress for. I'll have something sent over, he said casually when I hesitated. Just wear it, trust me. So I did. The suit arrived in a garment bag with my name embroidered on the tag. Midnight navy, tailored perfectly. When I put it on, I barely recognized myself. Neither did Ethan, apparently. You look, he started, then just smiled and reached for my hand. The ballroom was packed with people who spoke in half smiles and portfolio language. I was out of my depth. Ethan, of course, was magnetic, charming, calm, totally in control. But every time he introduced me as Tyler, there was no label, no explanation, and I tried not to notice that. Tried not to mind the way some people looked at me like I didn't belong. Tried not to hear the way a woman laughed too loudly at his joke and touched his arm like I wasn't standing 2 feet away. I smiled. I nodded. I played the part. But somewhere around dessert, I slipped into the hallway just to breathe. That's where he found me 10 minutes later. You okay? He asked. I looked up. You didn't call me your boyfriend, he blinked. What? At the table. Or anywhere tonight. You just said, Tyler, like I was your assistant. Or your charity project. His jaw tensed. That's not fair. Maybe not, I said, but it's how it felt. He stepped closer. This isn't easy for me. I'm not asking for easy. I'm asking for real. Silence. Then, I didn't know if you wanted that label, he said. You've been so careful. So hesitant. Because I didn't know if you wanted it, I said. You disappear. You shut down. You keep saying you want this, but every time we get close, you put up another wall. He looked at me and I saw it. Fear. Not of me, of us. I'm terrified, he admitted, of wanting something I can't keep, of screwing it up. I'm right here, I said. I keep showing up, but I can't keep proving it alone. He looked at the floor, and then, quietly, do you love me? The question hit me like cold water. I could have deflected, made a joke, but I didn't. Yes, I said, I do. He met my eyes, and then he stepped forward, slow, certain, and kissed me. Not a polite, restrained kiss, a public one, out in the hallway, within earshot of the ballroom, where anyone could see. I love you too, he said, breath warm against my cheek. Even when I don't know how to say it, I leaned my forehead against his. And finally, I felt him exhale, like he'd been holding that in for years. We didn't go back to the party, we went home. Kicked off our shoes, hung the suits on the backs of chairs, and curled up on the couch like the world didn't matter. No ballroom, no skyline, no glass walls between us. Just two people in the quiet, finding each other, again and again,